to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics that write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, a serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs, and currently I'm teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today's guest is Miri Rodriguez, author of the book Brand Storytelling, and this is the second edition. Miri, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. I'm really excited to be here. I've been waiting for this conversation to happen. So thank you. I'm really honored to be here today.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to have you here, and I really enjoyed the book, and it's something now that people really need to be good at, especially as we're now a global market, and with the economy kind of in a downward momentum right now.
Yeah,
Being able to tell your story is becoming more important than ever.
agree.
And especially what I found about your book was I felt this would be good for college students to read, because now that you're competing globally for jobs, you need to be able to sell your own personal brand. So I thought all this was great. So let's start off with you giving us your professional background and how you got to where you're at right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in tech for over 15 years now, and especially at Microsoft 12. In 6 of those years, I have been a storyteller in different functions of Microsoft. And that is something I call a privilege. I came into in a time, the perfect time, where storytelling began to permeate in our business functions as not just marketing or communication strategies, but really a cultural shift. And that came along when Satya, our CEO, joined on as CEO and decided, hey, we're going to lead with empathy. We're going to be a lot more open source to our audiences and vulnerable as a company. And we began to explore these roles as storytellers, and I was invited to be one of them. Today, we have over 4,000 storytellers worldwide, which is fascinating to think about in different functions and verticals of the company. So we are definitely continue to think about storytelling as a business forward strategy and a culture maker and shift, especially in the era of AI that we have today.
If you can explain what that means to be a storyteller, that would be great.
Yeah, I get that question a lot. As a storyteller, there's many things that can actually constitute a storyteller in different business functions. But in my specific function, I lead the strategy for stories, both internal and external, as sales enablement tools, and also as market advocacy tools. So what we do is we look at opportunities to tell stories that may be dormant, may not be thought of as a story initially. It could be something that the sales teams feels it's like, just the account win, and they're like, hey, we just won this account and that's that. We can take that and go, well, let's dig deeper and understand more what happened there. And that becomes an actual sales enablement tool. So we look at opportunities for story to really permeate through from this different aspects to serve our communities, internal and external. I really just kind of build the machine of the strategy. I work with comms and marketing partners, SCNO, which is our sales enablement partners. So really everybody is involved. And as a storyteller, I get to kind of manage the entire function of that and make sure it's well oiled.
I don't think I ever knew that Microsoft even had people like you that existed, and especially in the numbers of people you're telling us. But I guess that's an absolute must-have when you're trying to sell technical products, right?
When you're trying to sell more beyond the technical product, you're trying to sell a feeling, Mark, when you're trying to sell empowerment. And I think that's where it shifted for us. When we were trying to sell products, our mission was, a PC on every desk and every home. And that served us for a long time. And it was very product driven. And we were focused on the PC at home and on businesses. It really shifted for us. And we really thought about becoming empaths as a company and really establishing ourselves differently in the market, which obviously has worked for us when we thought about not the product, but the people that we serve and how we want them to make it, how we wanted to make them feel. And that's empowered. We wanted them to feel empowered. And that's what storytelling is about. What does it do for you? How do you make people feel something with your story?
How much different is the company now? Were you there when Steve Ballmer was the CEO?
Yep, I was there in the Steve Ballmer days. That's what we called it.
Yeah, and I gather the company has drastically changed since he's gone.
I got to tell you, Mark, for me, I mean, the reason I've been there 12 years is because there was this drastic change, and I saw opportunity to stay there longer, to explore myself and my career in a way that I hadn't seen before. The company, the culture changed it drastically for the better, and I think that has shown itself in the market, positioning Microsoft as an innovative company. Positioning this, our CEO Satya as a great leader, someone who's transformative leader. And so a great example of a company who has withstood the test of time because it has pivoted and shifted its perspective to become empaths in the market for our audiences.
Yeah, I think now they feel like there's a technologist running it with a real vision for what Microsoft should be. I remember when I was
Yes.
teaching at Wharton, and I had students, MBA students who were there, and nobody wanted to go back there. And
Yeah.
now, and Microsoft had always been a place that everybody wanted to go to, as they do like
Mm-hmm.
Apple and Google.
Mm-hmm.
But now, under him, uh, it's back to where it was before, where people want to be working at Microsoft and see a great future and that they can make a difference. So I think that's
Absolutely.
fantastic.
It
Why
is.
did you write this book?
I wrote it because I failed at storytelling when I was invited to become a storyteller for engineers. So when I went to Seattle, the first role I had was actually to tell the stories of how we were digitally transforming within Microsoft, taking our on-premises data to the cloud. And I thought, I have a comms background and marketing background. I can absolutely do this, right? No big deal. And so I took the role. I was excited. I landed, and I soon realized I did not have the skill sets that I needed to really tell the story. It wasn't landing. It took me 3 months of pure failure where I was doing all the things that I knew that I could do, and it wasn't landing. I was not understanding what my audience needed. At the same time, I was actually finishing my master's degree in communications with integrated marketing and communications, and I decided to use my capstone project to say, okay, well, I'm definitely failing at this. Let me just plug this in and see where I can make something happen. And I decided to think about storytelling not as just telling stories, but as designing stories, making stories product. Thinking about a product design process. And so I took design thinking principles and I plugged in those 5 steps of design thinking. And it was an overnight success. I mean, we went from consumption of stories in a green space where the stories live, that the dev team reads, from like 125,000 people reading these stories to 5 million without any media, any marketing behind it. And so it was really fascinating to see and understand how when you look at story from a design perspective and what it necessitates to go through in order for you to deliver something specific to your audience, however niche or however general, then you're switching your brain to how you're going to take a look at those 5 steps and how you're going to build a story arc. And so I wrote the book because people began to ask me, Miri, how are you doing that? It's a success. I became what you call Microsoft famous, and so people began to reach out to me asking me how to do it. And then I was in London giving a talk about it, and the publisher came to me and said, "You need to write a book about this." So I did.
Well, that's awesome. And again, congratulations
Thank
and
you.
doing such a great job. So
Thank
let's
you.
dive into the book. How do
Yeah.
you recommend brands effectively align their storytelling techniques with their mission statements to ensure
Yeah.
consistency and emotional connection throughout their
Mhm.
customer interactions? Because you hear marketers talk about
Yeah.
making sure that you have this emotional connection.
You do. You do. It goes back right to the mission. I say it in the book and I say it all the time. You have to revisit your mission statement and see where it is landing as a story, as a brand story. The mission statement really is part of that initial foundation to your story. And if there's nothing that has a feeling embedded to it, um, you probably have to rethink your story, your mission statement. If it's in your about us part of your website and nobody can recite it, nobody understands it. It's just a statement for shareholders. It is time now to really rethink that mission statement. As I said earlier, we did that at Microsoft, and it was a very intentional. In fact, there's a story behind the mission statement when it changed when Satya brought the CMO on board, Chris Capicella at the time, And he said, hey, let's rewrite our mission. And it became to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. And there's a story that Chris said that, Chris said to him, why do we have to have all those words? Like, we could just say to empower the world, right? And Satya said, no, 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 we need to really delineate to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more, because we want everybody to see themselves in our story and we want them to feel empowered. So I use that anecdote a lot, a story, because if your mission statement does not have your audience in it as part of the story, and it doesn't have a word that really has emotion attached to it, it's probably just words, and people are not really thinking of the brand from a perspective of connection, of human connection. So you start there. The way that you can actually permeate the story and begin your storytelling techniques is effectively thinking about your mission statement and then delivering that through everything else that you do. Making sure that everything around every vertical knows the mission, understands the mission. At Microsoft, we have it in our badge. And every time I badge in, I see my mission statement. I remind myself that I'm there to empower. That's my job. We all get up in the morning to empower. So really activating your mission statement as a feeling, as a mandate. And if it's not doing that today, you start right there. You have to revisit that mission statement first and then embed it in your brand story.
How do you stay authentic? I mean, and I can tell that you yourself seem to me to be, in a very positive way, emotionally driven. That people would say that you're very authentic. I mean, you just come across that way. So
Thank you.
how do you get a company like Microsoft, where I think the impression is not, I can't imagine emotional connection
Yeah.
with Microsoft, unlike you do with food, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it
Okay.
brings back good memories of doing family things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how do you stay authentic as a
Mm-hmm.
company when you're trying to do that, and when you're having a product that doesn't seem to garner emotional connection? How do you make that happen?
Yeah, it goes back to after you rethink or you revisit or reimagine your mission statement, then you go to the core values and you think about what those are. Do you list them? Does your audience know what your company stands for? What is the stance of that brand? So when you think about technology, specifically at Microsoft, yeah, you can argue that, product is product, technology is technology. But when you think beyond that and say, hey, our technology is doing this for our constituents, for our citizens. It is changing someone's lives this way. We're looking at accessibility. We're looking at inclusive gaming. We're looking at, carbon zero, carbon neutral. So when you extend it from product and look at the core values of the brand and how that product is enabling the core values for people, then now you're telling different stories, and you're telling human stories that people care about. We care about our planet. We care about inclusion. We care about accessibility. And so all the things that we care about are happening through your product. So how can you do that? How can you explain to people through your story how your product or service really delivers beyond that, really is making a statement that we all care about. And because we care about it, we attach emotion.
Do you come from a family of storytellers?
I do. My dad was a preacher for a long time, and my mother was a pastor, so she also was a preacher. So you had an evangelist and a preacher. I come from an evangelical home, and so yeah, the answer is yes. And actually, that didn't work for my benefit, I have to say, because I was very averse to that. I thought it was manipulative. I was like,
Right?
how you
Yeah,
can use
sure.
words to conjure emotion and manipulate. Not that they were doing that. I was just saying in general sense. So I was very skittish at the idea that you can use stories, and it really does impact someone's response, someone's emotional, can touch on someone's emotions and strings, heartstrings, if you will. So yes, I do have a family of storytellers, but I didn't become one because of that. I didn't even think I was ever going to have a job as a storyteller going into tech. That wasn't a thing when I went to school.
Where did you go?
So I initially wanted to be a fighter jet pilot. So I went to school at high school. I took a 4-year program to do that, but I was not allowed to actually go into the academy. My dad didn't let me. So I ended up going I had 2 scholarships, one to the Air Force, and then the other one to the Air Force Academy, and the other one to a community college, which eventually you can transfer to a state university. So I went to Broward Community College, and then I
Sure.
transferred to Florida State University. And then eventually I went to Georgetown and did my master's there.
Wow, congratulations. Very, very
Thank you.
nice.
Thank you.
In your experience, what are some of the common pitfalls that brands face when attempting to integrate storytelling into their marketing strategies, and how can they avoid these challenges?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things I continue to see is that we talk about integrated marketing, and that became a process that everybody understood I would say in the early 2000s. People were talking a lot about integrated marketing as a process, as a strategy internally. And I think people just with integrated marketing processes, it attempts to unify, but actually makes things very siloed. So when you have storytelling and you start to think about storytelling as part of your communications and marketing strategy, it's really important that you think about that messaging and how it permeates through every vertical, every room of the house of your company. And so that looks very, it begins to be dissonant if you start talking about something here at the sales level or at the initial through the customer journey, and someone's telling this story here and somebody else is telling this story here. So that happens a whole lot where people think, oh, we're just going to go tell stories, and each department is just telling stories and they're not talking to each other. And so your customers are still your customers, right? And so they know that you're telling this story here and this story here, and it may be dissonant. So it's really important to unify that story, get everybody in the room and understand what we're telling our customers from end to end. And that's, I mean, everything from sales to customer service and everything in between. It's really important that everybody aligns on that main story, on the brand story, and the messaging around that. And that can be difficult when you have products. For example, if you're like us, a tech company, and there's a lot of emerging products that are hitting the market in different phases and stages and for different sectors and industries. So right now I'm in the health and public sector industries, and we have a lot of great products that haven't, they're not going to be adopted yet in government because there's a slower process. So it's really important to understand, as me, how do I take marketing and all the exciting things that marketing is doing, and I can actually take that and still tell a story to my government customers about how that's coming along in the pipeline, but it's going to, take a little while for it to be available or for us to adopt or whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of advocacy that you have to have as a storyteller to deliver consistent messaging and not dissonant messaging across the verticals of your business.
Yeah. In chapter 2, in your experience, how can brands effectively identify and communicate their universal truth to ensure it resonates with their target audience on a deeper emotional level, which you've kind of alluded to?
Yeah. So I will clarify. Universal truth is a term that I use personally when I began to really think and activate storytelling in a design thinking process. And so I call it universal truth because it's something that we can all really align to, no matter our lived experience, where we are geographically. As human beings, we can all connect to that truth. And that truth really is an emotion. So just to put that in context of your question, how do we align to that truth, that storytelling truth, and how that it can resonate with the target audience, identify it, communicate it. Well, you first have to actually identify what it's going to be. You have to ask yourself the question and say, what is our brand's universal truth, right? What are we standing for? It could be more than one, but it has to be an emotion that you're attaching to. What does our brand stand for? Does it inspire? Does it evoke action? Does it, what is the thing that it does? Again, back to Microsoft, we hope to empower. So our universal truth is empowerment. We know what it feels like or not to be empowered. So that is our truth. How we have done it at Microsoft and how I personally continue to do it in my role, thinking about communicating that is consistently reminding what it means to empower in our sector. So for example, I am in sales. What does empowerment mean to me and my audience? To empower my sales team, to empower their customers. If I work in finance, what does that mean to finance? How do they empower themselves with the numbers? How do they empower our customers? How do we talk about the numbers with data storytelling? So that is really how you take that word, that universal truth, and talk through it as an activation, really as an active motion throughout each of the verticals. And it has to come from leadership. Leadership has to align these messages at the top with communications, internal communications, and then continue to drive that. And it's going to be a long-term approach. It's not going to be a campaign. It's not going to be a one-year thing. It's going to be, you always talk about it every single time, every single email, every single, town hall, whatever meetings internal you have, whenever you speak to your customers. I mean, right now we're actually working on sales kits, which are internal sales enablement. And we have to go back to what is our truth and how did we say it a year ago, so we have that continuity, because people will forget. And so there's that, the universal truth continues. It's always the foundation of your story. And you have to always ask yourself, is the universal truth in my messaging? Is the universal truth in that email? Is the universal truth in my PowerPoint? When we go out and talk about our numbers, are we talking about our universal truth? And that really becomes your foundation for messaging.
Do you find that people come from maybe a marketing background or innovation background really buy into that more than financial people who are numbers oriented?
No, I find that very opposite, because and I find that people that are in marketing, I'm in marketing as well. I've been in marketing, and so we have to always we always our challenge, I would say, is that we always fight trends. There's also a lot of trends happening, and so we want to stay on top of trends, and we may forget, because we're so, we have to always stay on top of what's happening, and there's so much happening, that we may forget to get back to our story, get back to the origin story, or get back to our universal truth. People like engineering, finance, that they, once they align to that messaging, they actually are really, in my experience, have been really good to say, okay, this is our foundation. We we continue to drive this, as they're very structured in the way that they do their messaging. So once they have that foundation, they actually build on that foundation, and they actually have a lot of continuity. So I think trends can distract a lot in comms and marketing, and especially in today's world where digital content is just so pervasive. So I think we have to keep reminding ourselves and keep ourselves authentic to our message, and grounded in our messaging and our universal truth.
Can you share specific examples of storytelling techniques that you found most effective in transforming customer experiences into compelling narratives that align with the brand's mission and value?
Yeah. So internally, we have. I'll speak about actually one of the latest things that we're doing at Microsoft in my own organization, in the sales organization. Internally, we have something called WinWire, which is it's just an email that is sent out and sent across all the way to the top from a sales team that wins an account. So it's called a WinWire. Hey, we got this account, or we got this. We want this customer, and it's just a rah email, right? Like, hey, we did well, and everybody rah-rahs around them. It's great. And so I looked at that and I thought, well, what can we do with this to actually turn this into an actual story? How can we look at this piece of content that is just an award acknowledgement for our sales team, and actually turn this back to the customer, and make them feel good for what we've done and had that partnership that now we now have. So I began to dig deeper into how we can take these emails and put them in an actual app and a digital library, and within the app, creative story format. So it actually became, just simple, where the sales team could just grab their own email and plug in what was the challenge, what was the solution, and what were the results. The results for Microsoft, and then the results for the customer. And then from that, I'm actually using AI tools to help me create a formatted story that then I rewrite, and then we turn it back into case studies. We make them, into different formats of blogs, articles, anything that actually tells a story of what happened to the customer after we won the account. This is something innovative, because a lot of times we have waited until we have big results. And usually it's a huge case study that took us years after we got the account. But there's a emotion in the in the initial part of, we got this account, that is in itself a story, and that humanizes the brand. Hey, we're excited to be partnering with this customer, and it's not just, we don't have all the results yet, but we have started, and we are piloting this, or we've started this use case. And so that is a really great example of how you can think about techniques when you're thinking about content that may pass you by as like, oh, that's just content. How can you really look at opportunities for that to look, is there universal truth there that you can look at and extract and make it a story that is valuable for all constituents? And there's so many of those that we miss a lot because we're not looking for them. So a lot of times we want to create new stories. Most of the time we already have a lot of stories. So we've created a digital library, and now that's a really wonderful way that we're extracting content from those WinWires.
We have a question from the audience. Okay. Everyone's talking about how important storytelling is in business. Should storytelling process be different when it's used for targeting clients compared to when a company is seeking more capital? What are the
Mm.
corner times of a good story?
Great question. I will say that a lot of times when we think about brand storytelling, um, the actual brand storytelling function, it plays two functions. It's really a dual function. One is the story of the brand, what we call the origin story. And that is the story that we will always tell about the brand. It is the brand being an entity, why it exists, what are the core values, where it's going, why it's going there. It's an opportunity to always keep informed, internal and external, our audiences about what is happening with the brand and why. And a lot of times when brands don't do this, you can see the examples happen quickly in social media where a brand makes a change. Maybe they change their stance politically and they just announce it, or just radically make a change and say something on social media, and people do not respond well because they don't understand the why behind that change or that stance. And so the brand story continues to be always and should always be told from every aspect. But to the question more specific around specific audiences, yes, you should have different stories for different audiences. At Microsoft, we have, a huge, broad audience, a global audience. We have 12-year-old Xbox players and, and 50-year-old cloud engineers, right? AI engineers. And so while empowering, our big story, empowering a 12-year-old is going to look different in our storytelling than empowering a 50-year-old engineer. So yes, you look at your audience. You actually, part of the first step that I talk about in design thinking is empathizing with your audience. Who are they? What do they need? What is important to them? What keeps them up at night? And then the story is going to make them get curious about your brand, get connected emotionally. And so yes, you should be telling different stories to different audiences, especially if you're thinking about funding, shareholders versus actual customers. There's a lot that you should be thinking about differently, but the story mission and the story universal truth is always the same. Always go back to that.
I got to have you talk to my class here in Vietnam by way of Zoom, because I think it's so important for them to know, especially I'm 63 and I had no idea that there was a position called storyteller in an organization like Microsoft, and they
And
had like
beyond.
500 of them.
Yes. And you can search. I mean, right now there's so many. We're hiring all the time for storytellers. You said go to the career site and just search for the keyword storyteller, and you're gonna get a lot of different roles that are in different verticals. And it's very surprising to see because there's many ways that you could be a storyteller, a visual storyteller, you could be a video storyteller. There's so many different ways.
How can brands effectively identify and incorporate the right magical elements into their storytelling to
Mhm.
enhance emotional engagement with their audience? I think it's really interesting. I mean, super simple if you're selling cupcakes, right?
Yeah.
But much harder in what you're doing.
Yeah, and when you refer to the magical elements in the book, I just want to clarify. I talk about visual elements. I talk about ways to format the story where it lands best with your audience, and that's in the ideation phase, right? So we have first you empathize with your audience, and that's to the question that was just asked. Then you begin to identify, the character, the plot, the conclusion, the story arc, and the mission of the story. What is the story going to do for my audience? If you before you tell the story, you got to tell the story where to go, right? And then the third thing is now ideation on the format, the structure of the story. And that's where the magic happens, because a story on paper can look, you know, normal, bland, or just basic. But once you start to add things like font, visual elements, color, texture, asking yourself questions that you probably wouldn't have thought about. If my story had a smell, what would it smell like? So you give attributes to the story, and that's what we call the persona of the story, that the relationship it has with the audience. When you think as a designer, the designer really thinks about what the user experience is going to be. So same thing with story. This is where you begin to ideate the magical elements. Once you have an idea of what the story is going to be about and theme, maybe you've identified your character, your plot, and conclusion. Now it's time to get really creative about what really will resonate best with my audience, what will conjure emotion. Colors do that, right? And so there's so much psychology behind how we present the story. Should we start with the climax? Should we start with the conclusion and then go back? What are the different ways? A lot of people talk about the hero's journey storytelling technique. That's a very popular one. We use it a lot in different ways, but there's so many. There's 8 basic one, there's 1,000, and you get to design that yourself. So give yourself the space and the creativity to really see what your audience, and test it too, right? See what your audience respond to in different ways.
What strategies can brands implement to ensure that their visual and narrative elements are consistently aligned across all customer touch points to create cohesive brand experience? And how important is that, especially when you guys are selling games and a variety of different things?
Yes, yeah. Again, it really starts with leadership. I would say a lot of communicators today, marketers, they really understand the concept of storytelling, but they have not been able to adopt it from the top down. And that's the buy-in is very important because it really starts with, and that's back to our story of our leader Satya coming in and really he led that charge, right? He came in with that and said, hey, let's rethink, let's reimagine how we're going to go to market, how we're going to be internally, what our culture is going to look like. So it has to be really an internal overhaul of how we've done things in the past, how our mission is being delivered, how we're delivering that to our internal and external audiences. And so my suggestion always is if you're a communicator, if you're a marketer that really is passionate about having this culture change from the inside out, use it as a pilot, come up and say, hey, I read this book, I went to this class, I took this workshop, and I'm really inspired to start thinking about storytelling as a culture changer within. And I would like to pilot these ideas, in the next 6 months. Give at least yourself 6 months. If you're having a challenge with leadership, understanding or grasping the concept or even adopting it. So it starts differently from the top down, and then it's really the work begins once they say, okay, let's do this. It's really about consistency. I would say it's a long-term approach for marketers. That's we move on quickly from campaign to campaign and what's the next goals and what's the next KPIs. But really, this is a long-term brand loyalty or brand love approach that we deliver, and we don't see immediate results yet. Don't expect them immediately, but you're going to start seeing some effects. In the long run, and it's short in the shorter run, not the long run. You'll see the effects soon enough.
Question from the audience. What's one blind spot that leaders have around storytelling that, if corrected, will have the biggest impact on revenue?
Oh, great question. I think the biggest one in my experience in talking to brands, because I do also consult with brands outside of Microsoft. I'm a brand consultant and I've spoken to, mom and pop brands and then Fortune 500 brands. I think the biggest challenge is when they think of storytelling as a marketing thing or a tool. It can be absolutely, but it stands alone as a strategy. And if we can deliver it like that way, if we can say storytelling in itself, it's a business forward strategy, then it can change perspective and it activates differently than just, oh, that's, go tell stories as part of your marketing campaign. So if we're able to present it that way and activate it that way, and get leadership behind it, it changes everything.
Another question from the audience. Whoop. What advice you have for novice storytellers and how to get better?
Love that question. This is I like, this is a really fun question. I believe, because for me, I'm a writer. I've been in comms. I'm a marketer. I do content strategy. So there's many different ways that you can dice up storytelling. And there's many different ways that you can deliver storytelling. So you first have to decide what kind of storyteller do you want to become. And there's so many ways. There's so many things that you can do with it. So decide which one. Find out what the types of storytellers that exist. What is your next move in your career? Where do you want to take that next? And then that will actually give you the idea of how you want to deliver those skill sets, what skill sets you want to acquire. There's futuristic storytelling, for example. That takes a lot of science-backed storytelling because you have to do a lot of research in order to tell stories about what's happening in the future and make actions toward the future. There's visual storytelling, so it's a lot around visual elements. So these skill sets, you're going to have a foundation, which every storyteller has, which are communications. Writing will be one of them. Empathy, a soft skill. There's content. Content strategy is another one. So there's some basic skill sets, but then you can definitely elevate and find a niche in your own storytelling. Mine is around designing stories, because that's how I learned to do it, and it really has worked for me. And so I talk more about story lording, not just storytelling, because for me, lording over the story, it really means I have control over the design of what I'm delivering to my audience.
What makes in your bosses or the divisional leader, whoever,
Yeah.
is, looking at the story, what makes them push back and say, God, this is crap, or
Yeah.
this isn't representing us? Uh,
Yeah.
and what do you do? Or let's say that you feel you're right about the way
Mm-hmm.
you're telling the story, and you feel the way
Good.
they're looking at it is not really in touch with the audience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What happens there, and how does that work?
Yeah, there's definitely a conversation. There's definitely this discourse happening. A lot of times I find myself going more with the emotional part of story, so driving a lot of emotion, and then I get pushed back on we're a tech company, right? This is about tech, and so where do we find that balance when we're talking about tech, but still I want to drive a human-led story. And I think there's always an opportunity to find a middle ground and to fight for that middle ground, because we can always, each side can always be, when you think about product and when you think about tech itself, we can just get really dry with that content, very technical jargon, and we don't simplify the concepts. And so it's interesting because a lot of times we assume that because we're tech talking to tech people in most cases, that it's going to land. And that's what happened to me. There's a lot of assumption there. And the reality is, even though we're tech people, we have tech language. When we endeavor to simplify the language and add a little bit of emotion, people turn their heads and go, oh, this isn't just a use case or a white paper. There's a human behind the story. I want to learn more. I'll get curious. So when you find your niche in your voice as a storyteller, you do get an opportunity to advocate for that voice and say, this is why I believe the story is going to do better. And that's where the prototyping and testing, the last two steps of design thinking really helped me, because you don't really bake the whole story and say, this is it. You bake concepts. You say, hey, here's concept 1, 2, 3. Here's where I'm going with these concepts. Here's how I'm driving these themes. And then you have that opportunity to have the conversation, of course, and bring in all the sides of the house so that everybody can really have the discourse around it and bring perspectives.
What happens, or what strategies can brands employ to gather continuous feedback from both internal and external audiences to adopt their storytelling approach, ensuring it resonates emotionally and remains relevant in an ever-evolving market landscape?
Mark, this is probably my favorite question that you're asking. And this just tells me again how true you have understood the concepts that I'm talking about in the book. Because if we do all the things that we've been talking about and then we just landed with no systems to understand how it landed, we've done nothing, right? We're shooting blanks. And so it's really, really important to think just as part of the story. I say that at the beginning, give your story a mission, tell your story where to go. And that means KPIs, that means systems to understand feedback. And that can look different ways, and it's going to look different ways based on your audience and your relationship with your customers. But do build that, do create that as part of the system, because part of the story is that you're going to get engagement. If your stories are landing or they're not landing, you're going to know. And so that as a designer should tell you, okay, this is not working. My user is not using the stories. And so that is the opportunity that you get to actually go back and redo it and rethink and reimagine. And if you don't do that, then you only did it halfway. And so a lot of times we get a lot of people going really excited about going to the stories, landing stories, and forgetting about it. Let's do the next story. And that's just the beginning. Take time to understand the story. Take time to think about the story. Hi.
I have a question, if I may.
Yes.
Just please type your question into chat, please.
If you can't type, I'll do that. All right.
And so let's go while Mark is putting his question in, and we'll make sure we definitely ask it.
Okay.
In your research, what specific measures did you find brands implementing to transition from product-centric narrative to customer-centric brand story? And how effective have those measures been in enhancing customer loyalty?
Yeah, so actually, I had a lot of research happening. I leveraged the time of the global pandemic, because it was such an incredibly um, strategic time, I would say, for brands. I didn't even have to do like proactive research. Brands were coming to me, asking me a lot of different questions, and that gave me a lot of information that I needed to know how the brands were thinking about a critical event that was affecting everyone globally, and then how could they act, what do they do, what do they say, what is the messaging that they really need to think about. So that to me was one of the most beautiful experiences around understanding how we as humans react, and then as brands need to react to something that is going to impact our audiences for the long haul, because people are going to remember what the brand did in this very moment, and people do remember. And so brands that did something positive and drove a messaging that resonated are reaping those benefits today, and we're seeing that. So when we think about practices, when we think about how to best connect at the emotional level, really think about the long haul. Again, I can't stress that enough. This is a long-term approach and strategy. It is not a campaign. It can serve as a campaign. It can be part of a campaign, but really you have to draw a long-term strategy of really brand love. And that's going to show up in different ways. If your story is landing, your customer is going to start engaging organically. They're going to start asking questions. It might even seem that they're not, that they're engaging even negatively, because they're giving themselves permission to talk to the brand. And that means they care. That means that you've sparked emotion. And so don't miss those opportunities to drive that as part of your story. If somebody's saying something, if two people are saying something, can you come back and actually, through your storytelling, answer the question or address the issue? And so getting a lot more granular at the story level with how we are delivering our messaging is a beautiful technique to response, and for the long term, aligning that brand loyalty that we want.
And here's Mark's question. What works
Okay.
best, a scary story or a feel-good story to get someone's attention? And you only have 4.5 minutes, and someone asked a question before Mark, and don't worry, we'll get to that question as well.
Okay, great question, Mark. I would say they both work well because it's emotions in general. And so whenever you're actually thinking about emotion, you can play on every type of emotion, human emotions that exist. And you should, if that's going to be part of your strategy. So a lot of times we can scare our customers into something that's impeding. We can create that sense of urgency if we want them to act immediately. And they do. And if you do it correctly, again, it's funny. Actually, I was giving a talk yesterday at a university, and I asked them to share, I was like, what kind of story do you want me to tell you? And they all said scary, which I thought was funny. I thought it was going to be like something else. People love scary stories for a reason. So I think if your audience can, you can deliver that to your audience in a way that resonates, play with it, think about it, and explore it, because all the emotions are valid. It doesn't always have to feel good. By the way, if you're always telling feel good stories, then it becomes a little bit inauthentic. People don't think that you're always on a high. And so there is an opportunity to be a little bit vulnerable, make your audience a little sad about something that happened to the brand, anything. I mean, again, think about the brand as an entity. It has highs and lows. It has a life. It was born. It has friends and foes. So there's opportunity to really be a little bit vulnerable with the brand and the brand story.
So you sound
How-
scared, but that makes you feel
Mark,
Yeah.
you have to mute.
Okay.
And any comments that you want to make, just please put it in chat.
Okay, so
Our next question is, can you recommend resources for understanding storytelling besides your book?
Absolutely. There are many free resources online. On LinkedIn Learning has a lot of great courses that you can take that are actually part of an entire stack of courses. So you have like basic all the way down to mastering storytelling. There's different aspects of storytelling that you can actually take courses on, like data storytelling, visual storytelling, color theory, and in storytelling. So that you can really just search online free storytelling courses, and you're going to get a lot of different things out there. I would suggest that, again, back to your other question, what kind of foundational techniques or skill sets do you want to have? Really depends on what you're going to build on and what kind of storyteller you want to become. For business strategy, I recommend brand storytelling, because that gets in deeper into the actual business strategy of storytelling. But there's many other ways that you can think about storytelling, data storytelling, and all the other ones.
How do you envision the role of storytelling evolving in a response to the growing expectations of consumers, particularly in terms of social responsibility and ethical practices? And what strategies can brands adopt to align their narratives with expectations effectively? And how do you make sure it doesn't backfire on you?
Yeah. So I think that's a two-part question. So I'm going to go for part one. I think it is critical to start doing that now, especially in the era of AI. We are now experiencing an influx of what we call deep fakes, content that is being created by robots that is permeating the market. That is, it's just saturating with content that may not be true, may not be real, and so that's making people scared and skittish about the content that comes through in their algorithm, in their feed. So the authenticity of the brand story, the reminder, the consistency of the story, telling it over and over again. People don't get bored of it. Just keep telling it. I always say, how long should you be telling your story until somebody else does, right? Until your audience knows it enough that they can repeat it. So there's opportunity to continue telling it, especially in this era of AI, where you want to make sure the distinction of your voice of your brand is told, and you continue to share those core values of your brand story so that people are remembering why your brand exists. Always. That's a huge opportunity that every brand has. And so when you think about that from the continuous prototyping, responding, emerging challenges, when you think about the authenticity of the cores and the values, how to effectively maintain that approach, you have to make a long-term plan. You have to think about integrated marketing plus, I call it reimagine integrated marketing approach to storytelling. How do you embed story in everything else? And it's just not a marketing add-on. It is part of what you're doing in every part of your brand story, in every part of your verticals. Bring in those teams, align your story, get them to tell the same story, and make sure that you are connected in the long term. We have roundtables with our V teams every other Friday. We sit and we talk with our legal team, with our sales team, to make sure we're continue aligned, because that misalignment can happen in a second. So you have to continue the alignment, and it's a strategy. It's an ongoing strategy.
This is the second part of what Mark was asking. So
Okay.
is it best to scare them a little, a solution to make them feel good? And he said he loves this stuff.
I love it too. Thank you, Mark. I would say it really, again, it depends on your audience. You can definitely test it. And that's actually part of the second part of my answer was, this is where testing happens. We don't ever have a full baked story. It is really a tried and true error. And the only way you're going to know is by asking yourself the question. At the beginning of your storytelling practice, you're going to ask, what emotions am I seeking to evoke from my audience? If it's scary, that's one of them. Okay, cool. And then at the end, when you deliver the story, you're going to ask yourself, did I scare my audience, right? Did my story evoke the emotion that I intended? And if the answer is no, or I don't know, time to go back and revisit that process and say, where did I miss it? How can I retweak this? Where can I reimagine? So there's an entire process that continues. It's a continuous feedback process. It's a continuous cycle. When you think about the storytelling with design thinking, it's a cycle. It never ends. So you're empathizing, you're ideating, you're defining, you're ideating, you're prototyping and testing, and you're doing it again and again and again. And you're going to see that consistency, and your audience is going to start to align, because they're going to start to see that, that consistency, and they're going to attach emotionally eventually.
What do you tell the companies, in the last 5 or so years,
Yeah.
companies were sending messages out that really touched on political and religious issues.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing them roll that back and avoiding that. And for a while, they felt like they had to be a part of the conversation. Some of them probably thought legitimately they should be part of it.
Yes.
Some of them, I think, probably thought this is a good way for us to sell more product, and may not even have cared about the issue as much as trying to connect with a certain audience.
Yeah.
What do you advise leaders of companies to do? Do they engage in public discourse, or do they remember that they're a business and that's not their business to do? If they want to personally, great.
Yeah. And I think it's chapter 6. I talk about ideas, and I call them unobvious trends, where I did a lot of research around this topic, around what is not obvious, but it's going to become obvious soon. And that's because of the consumer audiences the dynamics of consumer audiences that are changing because of new generations coming in, such as Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And so what you're talking about here is actually a trend, right? And the trends are driven by our consumers. So when you have when you have Gen Z, when you have millennials demanding to know these things from the brand, when they're actually saying, hey, what is your political stance? And if they say nothing, then they've already said something, and they drill on these ideas of the entity of a brand having to align with something or having to explore and have a stance somewhere, whether politically or socially with a social issue. And the brand has to make a decision to do that. And we've seen this. I think that's part of the brand story. And I think at the leadership level, once you decide to go that route, then it's like any human, once you've decided to say I'm going to vote for this person or disclose your political affiliation, then you have to really align to the risks that involves, right? And then the long-term impact of that. So you're right. Some brands are dialing back because it didn't measure the impact. Actually, some of them are reeling from that decisions that they make, and now they gain a whole new set of customers because of it. So they really it's a strategy that you have to think about in its implications. So if you want to do it, understand that it's a trend, that it's driven by a newer generation, which are consumers that are going to be possibly buying power for you. But if they're not your consumers, if Gen Z is not immediately buying your products, does it matter to you, right? If they're not your immediate audience. So you really have to take a look at who's driving these consumer non-obvious trends, and are they part of your buying power of your consumer audience? And if they're not, maybe it's not, it doesn't matter to you because your audience it's not driving that trend for you. So it's a research approach to this.
In chapter 6, could you elaborate on the scamper technique and provide specific examples of how it has been applied to create more vulnerable and authentic brand narratives within your own work?
Yeah. So Scamper is an acronym. And basically it's something that I've used as a way to really rethink the story that I've already written. So a Scamper has a way for you to think, and you can rethink, you can reimagine, you can research, you can rewrite, you can do different things with the story, and think about different angles and ways that your story could land differently. So this allows you to really, once you write story, a lot of times we're just kind of exhausted from the process to go, okay, I'm great, this is good enough, let's send it, right? Let's go make it go. But if you take a time to just pause, and what I say, scamper it, it's not mine actually. It's something that I took from a book. But if you actually think about what it means: substitute, combine, adjust, modify, put to other use, eliminate. What can I eliminate from the story? What can I modify? What can I adjust? It's really a way for you to self-check. Is the story really baked? Is the story, does it have other angles that I haven't explored yet? Can I adjust something? If I substitute the character, does it change the entire story? If I modify, if I combine characters, if I combine ideas. So there's different ways for you to just pause before you send out the story. Again, this design approach to storytelling, where what other ways can the story be told, and what are the implications, and what is the consequence of the story if I tell it in different ways.
In chapter 7, how did your personal experiences and cultural background influence your approach to ethical storytelling, particularly in the context of engaging diverse audiences like women entrepreneurs in Morocco? And where's your family from?
Venezuela.
I gather you're Hispanic. Venezuela?
Yes. I was born in Venezuela. Yes. So you actually make mention of a story I told, an experience I had in Morocco, where I went to speak at an event for a women entrepreneurship there. And I happened to bring my mom along. And my experience really was around, we're talking about cultural backgrounds. How does this influence my ethical storytelling? These are incredible women who are actually, the money they make, these are social enterprises. So the profits they make from their actual businesses go back to their villages. And that's an incredible, approach to business and the model. I find these women fascinating. And the more that I read about them before I went to speak to them, I just became more and more unrelatable in my mind. I was intimidated by who they were and what they did. And I was like, I don't know anything about them. I felt like I did as being a woman. But now I have nothing relatable to them. And so I think part of that experience led me to think again about empathy as a skill set. Before my storytelling as a practice, I really thought that empathy was a personality trait, and I didn't have it. I was not a natural empath. And so when I began to dig deeper into storytelling, I learned there's actually 3 levels of empathy. And that to me was, I needed to be ethical and empathize with this audience. How can I relate ethically? How I can't show up and not be relatable. And so engaging different audiences really is around telling yourself truths about how you show up and being vulnerable with that, and also understanding how that lands with your audiences, whoever they may be. In my case, I really felt I didn't have a lot to give to this audience. By the time I actually landed there, I was like, I don't know, I'm not feeling confident that I can deliver something to this audience who I can't really relate to. And so I actually ended up bringing my mom on stage because I read about, in that particular country. Well, it was actually East Africa, all of East Africa that were gathered there. They're very much a matriarchal society, and they really respect the mother, the women, mothers. And so I said, hey, I'm here to deliver something, but I just want to tell you that my mom really influenced my life a whole lot, and she's a great storyteller. So I let her take on the stage, and it really landed so well. Everybody loved her. She ended up, stealing the show, of course. But I think it was a moment for me of reckoning of, a lot of times we think we have something to say, and a lot of times it's more about listening to our audiences to deliver something that matters to them.
I'm sure your mom stole it from
She
you
did.
and she loved every minute of it, right?
Every
I mean,
minute, every minute.
yeah.
She ended up on national TV there, by the way, and like there was like it was unbelievable. She became like a TV star. She was on the news that day.
And what's your mom's background professionally?
She's a psychiatrist.
Oh, that makes her even more interesting, right?
Yes, it does.
What specific, and we're almost out of time here, but what
I
specific
know.
ethical challenges have you encountered in your storytelling journey? And
Mhm.
how did you navigate those dilemmas while maintaining authenticity and respect for your audience?
Yeah, yeah. And back to the story, it is always for me personally a challenge of, you know, am I manipulating my audience? I always have to ask myself, is there manipulation in this? Because I know that I can drive emotion with storytelling. Once you unlock that superpower, you're like, wow, I've unlocked a superpower that can move masses, right? And we see it all the time. We see it in politics. We see it in religion. Stories have an incredible power. And so I always have to check myself, and what keeps me true to my storytelling practice is that I believe in what I'm selling, that I believe in what I'm sharing, that I believe in the messagings that I am sharing with people. And I live it, right? So I'm not just selling something that I don't believe in. I love Microsoft. I love the brand. I love our products. I use them. So I talk about it with conviction because I love it. So a lot of times you're going to see people that you can feel that they're inauthentic because they're not really speaking from the heart. They're selling something, and they've used storytelling because they know they can use storytelling as to conjure emotion, but it won't feel authentic because they're not really sold themselves. If you don't believe the story yourself, you shouldn't be telling it, right? And that's where I check myself. Do I believe this story myself? Is it for me first, and then if I can get behind it, then my audience can get behind it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's very hard. You hear people they can sell anything,
Yeah.
but I don't believe that either. I believe you can't do that.
Yep.
Here's a last question for you. How
Okay.
much should you use humor in your story, or only use humor that relates to you?
Uh-huh. It's a good guy. I love that question. It's a good question. That's actually it's a magical power of storytelling as well. I'd say back to everything I've been saying, reiterating, it really depends on who your audience is. And that's back to the empathy. You have to think about how is it going to land? I actually, part of this experience I had in Morocco, I told a few jokes at the beginning and they didn't land well, and I practiced it. I thought I was culturally savvy. I had read all the things and it still didn't land. Maybe I was speaking too fast. Maybe it was too American for them. I don't know. And so a lot of times humor may fall flat because we don't really truly understand our audience and the layers of our audience. It's not just a high level demographics. So empathy is all about that. Empathy is about reminding ourselves we're human, they're human. And now with AI, I would say there's a great opportunity for you to do research. AI can help. It has helped me generative AI, things like Copilot and ChatGPT, I can do a lot more research on my audience and what keeps them up at night, or a lot deeper understanding on these demographics and psychographics of my audience that I may not know. I'll ask questions such as, what keeps a CIO in Japan up at night? And it's going to give me some, some ideas. And so things that it would take me longer to research. So continue the research. Again, as a designer, you're consistently thinking of your audience, and you're consistently thinking about designing something that is specific to your audience. And when you land it, they know what to do with it. Same thing with story. If you deliver something in your story as a product, and your users, your audience know what to do with it, you've done a great job. You design a story, you haven't just told it.
I have to tell you, the hour went flying by.
So fast.
I so enjoyed it, and I think everybody learned a lot from it. And I thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you for having me, Mark. I was looking forward to this for a long time. I love what you're doing. Thank you for the opportunity, the platform, allowing me to borrow your audience to share my insights. And I'm grateful for you, and grateful for your audience. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.